It's another Manly Mondays, and we are once again tying the Manly Mondays topic into God of War Ragnarok. It's so good. It's such a good game. But one thing I noticed, and I think I mentioned this in a previous video, is that I noticed that Kratos has a wider emotional vocabulary in Ragnarok than in previous games. And because he's got the greater emotional vocabulary, he's struggling with certain things more. In past games, he'd just get angry, scream Ares or Zeus or something like that to the sky, and that would be the extent of, Kratos's emotional expression. It was all done through visual metaphor, and like Renaissance art techniques. But he starts the game throwing himself off a cliff, trying to take his own life. So obviously Kratos is not okay. And in Ragnarok, they do this cool thing. They still use the visual metaphors for Atreus. And Atreus is the first character to yell at the sky and yell a god's name. He gets the first Odin in the whole game. And I thought that was telling, because then they have Atreus's combat style. People complain that you can play as Atreus, but his combat style increasingly is more and more like Kratos' fighting style. And the combat's so good that that's a cool little, coming of age metaphor through combat design. I am there for that. I am so impressed. But it got me thinking about emotional processing and emotional vocabulary. Because, in Ragnarok, I was struck at first when I saw Kratos use words like worried or afraid. I was like, that's different. And at first I thought, is that a mistake? Cthulhu, why are you hiding? Cthulhu's not big on this. At first I thought, is that a mistake? And it's like, no, that's deliberate. That's an evolution of the character. And it works in this story. Because there's a whole acceptance thing going on with Kratos. And I don't want to spoil anything because it's a really fun ride. I'm not finished it yet. So we'll see if all my theories pan out. Please, no spoilers. I had to ban a guy on Twitch for posting spoilers and not stopping and then calling people names. And I'm still pissed off and sad about that. But there we go. Expressing my feelings. More on that in a bit. Let's do the thing. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/LeannaK. Those someone who can use it but can't afford it sessions are becoming really, really integral. I've been catching a lot of profound, complex trauma clients. And I guess that makes sense because of my own background. I know what it's like. I know what it's been through. And that's why I love God of War, because God of War is all about trauma. But those are really important. I know inflation is biting, and, I know my UK clients they're having to pay more just because of the exchange, because the pound is tanking. But, if you can spare some, it's appreciated. It does help people because, of course, one of the shitty things about this stuff is a lot of times people need the help but can't afford the help. So what do? You end up on a 3 to 6 month wait list. Even if you can pay for it, people are waitlisted now, which is why I started doing this. But another thing I noticed about God of War is that every one of the adult characters is expressing trauma in a different way. Tyr displays the avoidance, right? Kratos still has the anger issues. He's still very, he's still rage, but he's tempering it with valor this time around. Mimir intellectualizes. I'm going to talk on that. Name of the video. And then there's Freya, who is a challenging character in all the best ways. I really give them credit for accurately depicting what that particular trauma looks like. 'Cause it ain't pretty, to put it lightly. And I mean, Freya is completely unreasonable, abusive, and, poster child for misplaced blame. But if you've ever had to deal with somebody who has her particular kind of trauma, that's what it looks like. Let's not sugarcoat this. Let's show people what not the media, single glycerin tear cry trauma. Let's show what it really looks like. And I think that's really good. And every single one of the adults has their reasons, but they're not good reasons. And there's this one scene mid-game where all the adults are ganging up on Atreus and not letting him talk because they're all experiencing their event through their own trauma. And I actually yelled at the screen. I think this was on Twitch. I said, "Holy shit, get off the kid's back." I've been, I'm in peer counselor mode. Like, let the kid speak. Give him a minute. Like, holy crap, they're all like 4 adults. Well, 3 adults and Mimir, who's ahead, jumping on the guy. And and Brock and Sindri were there as well, but Brock wasn't joining in. But it's interesting because the early God of War games were informed by trauma as depicted in Greek myth. The newer games are definitely more of a Norse take on the whole thing. And there's Norse myth functions very differently than Greek myth, in part because despite our awareness of these characters, there's actually very little written source text for these deities, these characters, so to speak. And it's very fragmented. And so there's certain things we don't know, and so there's a lot of room to play with the characters. And I like the fact that in Ragnarok they sort of bend but not break much of the interpretations. It's cool. And the Norse, obviously a people that had a myth where if you die in battle, you go to the better heaven. You go to Valhalla, or I always forget the name of Freya's realm. People, it's always Valhalla that gets invoked, but Freya got half the, or Frigga gets half the, probably the same deity. Gets half the warriors too. It's not just Odin's realm. But of course, if you die peacefully, not in battle, you go to hell. That suggests, natural deaths were not, when you have to make it seem like this is a good thing, it means it's happening a lot, right? And that's going to create certain things in a culture. And in a way, these myths were a form of intellectualizing trauma. And I was talking to this one client, and he was sharing his experiences, in the system. And this is something I hear from a lot of people. And I mean, before you jump on me and say, "Oh, that's just their version." Yes, but that's what they heard. Therapy should be client focused. If this is what the client understands they were told, that's what matters. And, if there's too many disconnects, it suggests the client-therapist relationship is not a good fit. But I keep, I keep hearing therapists say things and the word should comes up. And I'm like, because whenever I catch the word should coming out of my mouth, I'm like, nope, bad, no, because it's not about that. It's about what is. And this one client who's had a uniquely bad run of it said that a therapist said to him, "You're intellectualizing your feelings instead of feeling your feelings." And this happens a lot. These therapists throw out this term, right? And that's one that gets leveled at men a lot. And I have a different take on it as somebody who is or was an intellectualizer. And the good science, meaning the actual science, doesn't say good bad regarding some of those. Technically, intellectualizing can be a form of processing, but it can also be a form of dissociation. That's the issue with it, right? A lot of people set up a control structure to feel like, their life isn't just slipping through their fingers and spiraling out of control. They set up a control structure by learning everything they possibly can about the facts of something. Try to understand all the details, try to be able to explain it really well. But that can be a form of avoiding feeling your feelings instead of processing your feelings. And sometimes it's a feeling you don't have to feel, right? If you can give yourself a story that makes you feel better about something instead of worse, that's great. When you're dissociating from the emotional truth of what happened to you, and you see this a lot with abuse survivors, with trauma survivors. I've done it. They will be able to describe things in meticulous detail and intellectualize all the facts about it. They will psychoanalyze their abuser until the cows come home. But you can't get feeling words out of them. And I'll end up doing something like, wow, in that situation, I'd be pretty frightened, or I'd be angry or something. And then I'll get a yes or a no. I'll get a, yeah, that is how it felt, or no, that wasn't how it felt. And hopefully I'll get a, it felt like this. No, I wasn't scared, I was pissed off, or no, I wasn't frightened, I just sort of blanked. And a question I end up asking people a lot is, when you felt the heightened feeling, was it thoughts with words? Like, was it an internal monologue? Or was it just a sensation? People have described it as everything from like a ball in their head to a wall that sort of goes over the thinking, or a hazing out. And there are reasons for that. And there is a bit of a gender split on this. And I don't believe it's innate. I believe it's cultural, at least to a point. And it's interesting because I'm so fortunate to work with enough trans clients that I'm starting to see a pattern that their adolescent development is more in keeping with their gender identity than the gender they were assigned at birth. And that I'd love to be able to start doing research on a larger scale to see if that's so, because that there's like something very poignant there. For people who don't know, there's sort of known adolescent phases. They tend to start, girls tend to be 2 years ahead of boys. So stuff will happen to girls at like 4 to 6. It'll happen for boys at 7 to 8. Girls have another, like the toughest age for a loss for kids a lot of the time is between the ages of 10 and 12. Because they're still kids then, but they're old enough to know what's happening to them. But for girls, I find it's more 10 to 12. For boys, I find it's more 12 to 14. Because girls sort of hit that tween, early teen thing. And the years from 13 to 15 for girls are just these seas, these cyclones of emotion. Perception is reality. Everything's the best thing ever, the worst thing ever. You see that a lot in, reflected in books like Twilight. And that's why dismissing stuff for girls is crap. I don't like, because, there's a reason that girls at that age identify with that stuff. And, that's where the libidinous boy band thing kicks in, because it's practice. And then it kicks in for boys. And this is why I know I talk this to death. But the whole Son of Kal-El, John Kent, Superman as a 17-year-old. No, a 17-year-old teen is not a man. He's not. And it's not fair to put that on someone. Even an 18-year-old man, boy, whatever. An 18-year-old. See, the language is such a mess, right? It's the brain hasn't switched off that phase of adolescent development. There is an established phase for, boy teenagers from about 15 to 18 years old. And that's where Atreus is in God of War, essentially. I think he might be a little younger, but he's just coming into that, where anger is a part of it, and aggression is part of it, and a disconnecting from named emotions. We see it. And that's why all those studies that had 15 to 18-year-old guys, there we go, playing Grand Theft Auto, and it made them so aggressive. It's like, you could have put anything in front of that age group that got the blood pumping at all, and you would have gotten the same shit, right? Like, it's that age group. That's just junk. Fuck off with that, right? And it's not... I read A Clockwork Orange for the first time when I was like 17 years old. And this is one of those things where nowadays people would be like, why would anybody give that to a child? Well, I was in a big dystopian phase. I was reading Kafka. I was reading Orwell. I loved Aldous Huxley. But, I saw the Clockwork Orange movie, and a teacher went, read the book, because the movie's only half the book. And the movie is this, men are violent, you can't stop it. It's not the moral of the book at all. The moral of the book is that, young men go through this phase, and if you can just contain them enough to get them through that phase, they will settle down. And I don't think that's totally right. And here's what the science says, right? They found that, and I've talked about this before, women show greater emotional expression overall. Women tend to express more positive emotions and internalize negative emotions. So positive emotions, joy, happiness, support, internalize negative emotions such as sadness and anxiety. Now, one of the things I have found with that, though, is I find my female clients and friends respond much better to praise than the men do. There are exceptions, but I find a guy will react not great to the stuff that will make women, as a rule, thrive. And like I said, there are exceptions, and I, treat everybody as individuals, but I have noticed myself going on different tracks. You have to establish trust with a guy more before you start giving them that positive reinforcement, because it'll come across as condescending, or fake, even if it's not. And there might be a reason for that, because men, no surprise, express greater levels of aggression and anger. But there's something deeper than that, because now we don't just have self-reporting, right? Now we can actually measure biological markers, physiological markers, right? So at least in Western cultures, even though women express emotions demonstratively and verbally, women can name their feelings. Men have greater levels of physiological arousal, meaning greater blood pressure, cortisol responses to emotional stressors. Now, that cortisol level is significant, because we know if people are constantly revving high on cortisol, there's not only health impacts, but it affects a lot of things: judgment, emotional regulation, all that stuff. Perpetually elevated cortisol levels are not great. So what that means, the supposition is that men are feeling shit. Remember I said that ball in their head, that, men will describe physical symptoms. My chest was tight. I was breathing. I felt myself sweating. Like they can describe the physical sensations. They're feeling on a physical level, whereas women are expressing. And then we get into the greater rates of clinical depression, and some forms of anxiety that are reported in women starting in adolescence. But and for a long time, that's where sort of the women are the weaker sex thing came from. Oh, hysteria connected to women, right? Histrionics, right? There's a reason it's all hysteria, histrionics. It's the same root as hysterectomy. It's gendered language. Yeah, it sucks. Go Freud. But men, we see antisocial behaviors, like big catch-all, and alcohol and drug abuse. And so this is the thing when we talk about, for the longest time, it's like, oh, women have a higher emotional intelligence than men. Women have greater emotional skills than men. And this is why I said I differ. I don't think that's so. I think that the therapeutic tools are more aligned with women now, because massive swaths, dialectical behavior therapy was developed by a woman, and you can tell in the language of it. One of the things I do is just rework DBT principles to stuff that doesn't make dudes feel like, guys like, I don't want to light a candle. Some guys do, but a lot of guys like, I don't want to do that. Very, very shit. No, we're going to talk superheroes. That's why Hulk doing DBT. So happy. But there is a language issue, because if guys have that rattling around, that all these physical sensations with no words, because we don't give boys the same emotional language that we give girls. We actively punish boys for naming their feelings. We do. How do I know? Well, I experienced it firsthand when I started intellectualizing less. So instead of explaining the details of something, I started to say, that hurt, that upset, like that one kicked me. You've seen me do it on this channel for a reason. The negative responses I got to that were very telling. And they continue to happen. I don't care, because I know it's healthier and more accurate in the long term to go, yeah, that hurt. That just punched me in the gut, that one. Because I'm being honest. And I'm not dodging it. I'm not avoiding it. I'm feeling it and I'm naming it so I can process it. But people are real dicks about it, man, because somebody who is intellectualizing their own feelings, there's an avoidance that kicks in because it can be a dissociation. And so they just pounce and ba 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 ba, wall of text, wall of text, wall of text, which to the intellectualizer sounds like they're being very smart and above it all and everything. And being on the receiving end and reading it, it's like, yikes, somebody needs a hug. And that's the other unfortunate thing, right? We have this spin cycle in culture where we talk about toxic masculinity, but then we keep stuffing men back in there, right? Because the minute men start making those first steps into expressing emotional language instead of just Zeus, right? Aries. There's the punitive enforcement of norms, right? People say, including women, say they want men to open up more. They want men to feel their feelings more. They want them to be more emotionally expressive and connected. But then when guys do, people can't handle it. And so they get punished. And so they retreat. And so now they don't just have that lack of skill. They have an active bad experience that keeps them really stuck. And I shouldn't say they, because I went through this as well. I didn't know it was I could never figure out why I'd see other women be allowed to be absolute hot messes. Just be wrecks, you know. And it was seen as, oh, they're going through a bad time. Not they were weak. But when I did it, it was, what's wrong with you? We're so irresponsible. Get it together. Like, it was a bit of a family of origin thing. The minute I started seeing a therapist, every time I expressed a negative emotion, they shipped me off to the doctor. It was great. You know, no better way than to make a person experience therapy as punishment than to do that. But it happens all the time. And that becomes a real issue because people don't open up. When I had a guy this week saying he just went through the whole rigmarole of his case history with so many therapists, because one would move on and they get another one. He just starts saying, I'm fine. You know, he'd start saying, I'm fine, because he didn't want to go through it again. It was too hard. He was unpacking and unpacking and unpacking and being re-traumatized and feeling it all over again and getting nothing out of it, getting no tools, getting no assignment, getting nothing. Because when it's a physical sensation, the body got to move, the mind got to move. And that's one of the things I learned. If you give people an observational assignment in the first week, it's a lot easier on them. And I tend to find men do those more often than female clients do. And I don't know if that's just the particular people I work with. But guys love it when you give them a job, because it's something to do other than feel bad, right? It's not something they can fail at as long as they do it, right? As long as it's, you know, I always say, observe and record, you know, the changes in the week. When are you feeling, you know, the wall or the chest tightness? What's going on at the time? What was it in response to? Did you think thoughts first? Did you feel things first? This is all teaching emotional expression instead of just dealing with that cortisol spike. But I don't tell them, oh, here's what you have to do. You know, it's just do it. Just observe. I want to know, the more data you can give me, the more I can process it. And I find being able, because of course making a note of it, recording it, is a form of expressing it, right? It's not just bottling up. And it's the difference between, Kratos in the first few games and Kratos in God of War, the first Norse game, was kind of this, but Ragnarok's definitely this. They've got Kratos journaling in Ragnarok. And I'm like, oh my God, a little on the nose, but okay. Atreus does as well. But yeah, it's cool how they work that in. I see you, God of War Ragnarok team. But because things like games are not medicalized, things like anime is not medicalized. I mean, anime deals with a very Japanese form of processing trauma because, of course, so much of Japanese media goes back to the fact they were nuked, and that realization they were on the losing side of World War II, and Germany didn't get the bomb dropped on them. Japan did. I'm learning a lot about the role of intergenerational trauma in Europe too from wartime. And these things are, people deserve better and people can get better, and it's actually not complicated to get better. But if somebody's feeling chastised or criticized because of a behavior that they took on as a survival skill, it doesn't work. And I think that's part of the reason that men are less likely to seek therapy and have less good results when they do, right? Because the chastising, right, puts them off right at the top, and it's wrong. I completely understand why somebody who's humbling themselves enough to ask for help doesn't want to be told you're doing it wrong right off the bat. They know they're doing something wrong, but you got to give them time. Why? Because their coping mechanisms are dissociative, which means they don't feel their feelings right away. They feel their feelings later. And that is not a bad thing. That helps people get through crisis moments. It's really good to do in the moment. But the problem is that when people are really good you're really good in a crisis, people expect them to just dissociate. No one was always calm, and they tend to get the worst reactions when they're not calm. For a change, they're not okay because they're stepping out of their good old reliable role, right? So here's a few things you can do. Like I said, track those cortisol spikes. Track those brain fogs. Track the wall in your head, right? Really become aware of what your body's doing. You don't necessarily need words for it. Just connect them to the stimulus, what's causing that cortisol spike, right? Because that's more important than what you name it. People can call their feelings Fred for all I care. Clients with me, it's like, oh God, it's all superhero stuff, right? Like it's all, okay, so that's, the Winter Soldier program, or there's a few Mass Effect metaphors, because the Krogans, right, are Kratos. I've been quoting Kratos a lot of stuff with, people having trouble letting go of guilt from the past. And there's a great line in the game of sometimes you can't fix things, you can only make them better. Wise words. Um, but video games and superhero stuff, and they're great emotional languages for men, as long as you don't shit on them, right? Because the words will come in time. And I do Star Wars, another big one. That's the one I was searching for and not getting. A lot of Trek lately too. It's interesting. But the official words will come in time. It's almost like, Dharma and Tanagra Gelada, right? I don't care what the placeholder is, as long as we are processing, as long as we have communication. Awesome. And I know a lot of therapists will say that's wrong. I don't care. It's effective, right? If I can get those cortisol levels lowered in the short term, it's much easier to start going, okay, we're going to use more formal names for things later. But I want that cortisol level down. And this is something you can do. Or you can, I ended up changing, thank you for the person who said forum. More on this on Wellness Wednesday, but forum instead of support. Good suggestion. We've changed the men's panel to a straight up trauma survivors bubble. See how that goes. Pushed it a week. But yeah, appreciate your feedback on that stuff. More on this on Wellness Wednesday. We're going to talk more what intellectualizing looks like in general. I want to focus more on men on this one for obvious reasons. People seem to like the one too with Manly Mondays and Wellness Wednesdays. So yay. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/Leanna K. Or, very important, buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Coffee.com/Leanna K. Thanks for watching Manly Mondays.